proceed, Robert.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Foster, and I serve as the chair of Board of Directors of TO Live. The clerk has confirmed that we have quorum, so I'd like to call this special meeting of the Board of Directors of TO Live to order. This meeting is being held using the city's WebEx technology, with members and staff calling in or connecting by video conference or attending in person at City Hall. Because we are meeting remotely, we ask for your patience with any delays and technical issues. Members of the public can observe the meeting on YouTube. I would like to request that all staff keep their videos turned off unless they need to speak or answer questions. This will make it easier for me as chair and for those watching on YouTube to observe members as they participate in the debate on each item and during votes. I also ask that all members and staff keep their microphones on mute unless you need to answer a question or speak. When voting on an item of motion, I would ask that members make sure that your video is turned on and raise your hands to indicate vote. Although we are in different locations and meeting remotely today, the board would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather today is the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and currently the Mississaugas of New York. We acknowledge these nations and all other indigenous nations, including the Métis, who have called the land in which one home. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and create on this land together. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you do have an interest, please raise your hand. Unmute. This is a special meeting with one item, CT 12.1, Facilitators for the Board of Directors of TO Live. This is a letter from me recommending the board consider retaining facilitators named in the confidential attachments. The proposed facilitators will be available to join us in closed session as well. We will start the meeting in open session if anyone has any public comments or questions of either me or TO Live staff, and then we will move to closed session consideration of the item. Do any members have public questions or comments? If so, please raise your hand or unmute your mic to let us know.
Paula Fletcher, question. Hi, everybody. How's your summer going? Don't go to Cherry Beach after 7 o'clock. You can't keep locking it up. I'm not clear why this is a confidential item, and I wonder if the clerk can answer that for me, please.
Councillor Fletcher, through the chair, this is the clerk. This item was submitted to us by the chair with a confidential attachment. So that is how we have processed it. However, yes, this is a public portion of the meeting. All meetings begin and end in public, and you are able to ask public questions or speak publicly before the meeting is closed.
I just have to be clear, because we have had problems before about what is technically public that has been done in private. And I need to have a clerk ruling if that's a public document or a private document. It's not up to the board as a city board. The clerk does have an opinion. You need to just clarify that that's the clerk's opinion as well.
Councillor Fletcher, this is Jennifer Forks from the City Clerk's office. Hello. Through the chair, we have received this item under the understanding that it is a procurement item, and as such, there may be, on the advice of the chair, reasons to keep at this time, to keep the names of the possible facilitators confidential until such time as the procurement has taken place. So the reasons for confidentiality of the confidential attachments were provided as negotiations to be conducted on or behalf of the board. However, it is up to the board to determine whether or not it wishes to adopt those. These are the board's documents now that they're in front of the board.
But just to be clear, governance point of view, there has to be an item on the agenda that's fairly fulsome, and then there would be a confidential attachment that may name people. Having the whole item in confidential is not correct. If what we're procuring is a public matter, and why we're procuring some, Toronto Water is buying a sewer, then we may have something confidential regarding the actual, well, we don't actually, everything's in public. So I just want to make sure we don't have any problems around this as well. I don't know if Mr. Elvidge is around. I'm sorry to belabor this, board members, but we can't have any more stumbles here. And I just need some good guidance from you, Mr. Chair, or from the clerk as to what we can discuss in private and what we should be discussing in public. If we want to move in public, that be facilitators for certain reasons, et cetera, and then there's names that are advanced that you want to procure somehow, I think that's different. But to have the whole conversation in private doesn't seem right to me. If we have a need for something, we need to lay that out in public. And I don't see that on the public agenda.
Councillor Fletcher, this is Jennifer Forks from the clerk's office again. There is a public letter from the chair on this item that outlines the request to the board, and then 2 confidential attachments identifying the potential facilitators to be retained. Again, it is up to the board to decide whether it wishes to close the meeting at this time or not. The board can and is welcome to keep the meeting open to the public and determine whether or not, again, it's to the board's discretion to make the determination on whether or not to maintain those confidential documents as confidential.
But really, what we're really looking at is whether we want to have a discussion about the issues that are arising here. And I think it would be helpful if you posted the letter, because we often do that. That's the agenda item. And whether or not that's something to discuss or whether we go straight into private, because the public letter can be also discussed. So I just want to do things right. That's all. You're telling us we can do whatever we want, then.
Councillor Fletcher, it's Jennifer Forks from the clerk's office again. The letter from the chair is posted publicly on the item on CT 12.1.
Okay. Very good. All right. So I think you need to ask Mr. Chair, is there any public discussion about your letter? That's the first thing.
Councillor, I leave that to your discretion. If you feel that there are matters that should be discussed publicly, I'd ask you to give us some guidance, what you recommend. If we're more experienced in this than I.
Well, I'm kind of looking for the clerk as to what, the clerk advises you as to what we can or can't do in private or in public. So I don't want to stray too far off of, we got in trouble with that other piece, public and private, around the St. Lawrence. So I don't want to have a second visit on this one. I don't know.
Councillor Fletcher, this is Julie Amoroso. The confidential attachments are specifically the information about the facilitators. The item itself is public, and the discussion of appointment of facilitators is a public item.
Okay, so I think then the chair really needs to lay out what we're doing with facilitators and why we need facilitators, and then if you want to go in private around to discuss and what the procurement method might be, and if you have particular people to procure, then that's assuming we're following that properly. And this is all just around governance issues, of course. So I think that's helpful to have that conversation about why and what we're doing with facilitators at this board. I'd like the chair to lay that out. There's nothing there that, in the general conversation, that is not in public. I understand that as a procurement matter, but why are we procuring facilitators?
That's not my decision. Procurement of facilitators is a decision of the board. At the last board meeting, there was a consensus that we should proceed to retain facilitators. So I'm simply following up on the consensus of the board from the last meeting that we should have facilitators. So it's that simple. And if the board,
sorry, Robert. Was there a motion at the board? Was it a direct?
No, it was not a motion.
Okay.
There was a discussion, and my take was it was a clear consensus with the board members that you wanted a facilitator. Given that, I then approached the city, dealt with the chief people officer and a number of other people at the equity, diversity, rights division, and asked their assistance. They recommended 2 names. And so the 2 names that you have in conference are the names that were selected and recommended by city staff. So I'm simply trying to facilitate wishes of the board. If the wishes of the board have changed, I misread them, then we can end the meeting. I'm open.
Let me just be a little more formal. So is that, and I'm unable to open that confidential attachment, so I'm going to assume that that's a letter from the city to the board with specific people that they're suggesting.
Councillor Fletcher, so there is a public letter from the chair recommending the appointment of facilitators, and those facilitators are in a confidential attachment. So the confidential attachment is specifically the information about the facilitators themselves, but there is a public item from the chair, and this is an item from the chair. It is not an item from TO Live staff or from the City of Toronto.
I understand, but the chair has said that the facilitators are given to him from the city, so I'm going to assume that we have that somewhere in writing.
That is not part of the item that we've posted.
Part of the, okay, then I'm just going to go back, governance-wise, the board needs to follow really strict rules as a city committee, and I know you all want to do that. So number 1 is a consensus at a board. Really, there has to be a motion. So there would have to be a motion today to hire facilitators for whatever reason, and then the confidential discussion would be, here's what's recommended by whomever recommended them, and probably in that discussion that would come up. So I want to make sure we're doing this, what I'm going to say, according to Hoyle, in that way. Now, if I'm off a base, I need to hear that, but having a special meeting to hire facilitators and it's not clear why we're hiring facilitators isn't public. The reason why we're hiring them needs to be very public, and then we would go into that. Or facilitators for board governance, facilitators for board whatever. I just think that we have to be as any other committee would be.
John, Mr. Chair, I'm going to jump in if I can. So I think just to Paula's point, there are things that are clearly confidential matters, such as any questions about somebody we might hire or financial arrangements around that. There are things that are clearly public, where, as in, should we hire facilitators, without getting into who we should hire. However, in the public portion of the discussion, we might well venture into territory which could involve individuals, which makes it a little bit of a gray area whether it should be public or private. And perhaps we need some guidance from clerks on that, although I understand that it's a bit awkward for them because they don't know where anybody might be going with the public discussion to know whether it should be public or private. So I like Paula, I think we need a bit of guidance, but we're kind of, we're in murky waters here. I think it isn't completely clear because we haven't got into the discussion, and it's not clear where that would go and whether it would venture into confidential matters.
Yeah, I might suggest if the board is becoming uncomfortable with this as to where it's going to go, we recess this board meeting. Whoever wants with me can spend some time with the clerk and get this all properly defined as to what is appropriate in public, what is appropriate in private, and then come back. Because if we're going to do this on the fly right now, I'm becoming increasingly uncertain as to what is the appropriate thing to do. And I think Councillor Shillian, your comment is right, because there's a high probability that people will discuss names, and that starts to make me feel uncomfortable as to what responsibilities are. Should find out. So I'd be happy to recess this board.
Same time, I think we do need some kind of discussion in some form about how we would like to proceed, and there may be a view that the hiring of consultants at this point is premature until we've had more internal discussions, and I'm not sure quite how we get at that.
It's up to the board. All I was doing was acting on what I thought was a very clear consensus with the board. That's inappropriate. Let's back down.
Mr. Chair, can I jump in, please? It's Kathleen.
Yeah.
Would it help if I gave a brief overview of sort of the general consensus of why I think you put the letter forward, and then move the motion to adopt your recommendation for to look at two facilitators and then move into camera?
By all means.
Okay. I think most of the board likely shares my opinion. There have been a number of things that have happened over the last month or so that made it quite clear that as a board, we need to do some work on our approach around issues of diversity. I'll just say issues of diversity. And because of that, and because of conversations that we had in camera at the last board meeting, it seemed to make sense to look at ways in which we could help the board, all of us, to move into another sort of realm of understanding and approach and so on. And then as part of that, to look at recruiting new board members for the board that would represent Black, Indigenous, and people of color. I think many boards out there are going through this same process. I don't think we're alone in this, and I think it's an extremely serious and important endeavor for us to be undertaking. So having said that, I would like to support the chair's recommendation to look at potential facilitators to help the board in this process. And I would move that motion.
Thank you, Kathleen. Discussion on the motion.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Kevin.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I don't know who else wants to speak. I'm reluctant to go again if there's others who haven't spoken yet, but I think this is, I don't have any problem with hiring these facilitators per se, but I think it is premature to do that until we have dealt with some other broader issues. Or we at least need to do those in conjunction with any assistance from these facilitators. I think to be less oblique, I think we need to look at the functioning of the board and I won't say any more at this point.
I wonder if these are separate issues. The facilitator focus, and I have spent some hours on the phone with the two facilitators.
I think sorry, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I think the concern here, or my concern, is that there is perhaps too much thought that that if these facilitators come in and facilitate, that will somehow solve any problems we're having, and I don't think that is the case in isolation. Certainly, I think they are necessary and helpful, but as part of a broader look at how we do things.
Well, in my mind, they're separate issues dealing with diversity in terms of how we function. Is I thought, different than governance issues. These people are not governance people, and there was just probably worth looking at a webinar put on by Business in the Arts on board governance, and so there's David Beattie is considered the expert in governance in Canada, and the board could consider bringing him in to talk about governance and give us guidance as to what we should do there. There are outstanding people in the field. BD's organization at the Rotman's Business School did a very recent survey amongst not-for-profits on governance issues. So he could be very helpful to us, and I'm sure he would be willing to attend.
Hi, it's Paul. Can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Okay, I'm connected twice because my audio's all messed up today. I hope there's no echo. I'm of the same mind as John that I believe we need to figure out the bigger picture, and I fully support bringing in facilitators as part of that process for sure. But we properly defined what we're trying to accomplish in the bigger picture where they're part of it. This just feels a bit rushed that we're hiring facilitators without really defining the mandate. Because I mean, let's face it, while the issues we're discussing are very important, the fact that theaters aren't going to open and probably the TSO is now closed until September 2021. The theaters are closed for the next year. I mean, in all probability, that's where a lot of theaters are going to end up, and so we have many issues, and this is among them. It's an important one, but it's among other issues, and I believe we need more comprehensive look at this, and then bring in the appropriate facilitators and consultants as required to guide us through the various pieces.
Kathleen.
Sorry about the mute. I have to say I couldn't disagree more with you, Paul and John. And I read with great interest Steve's email that he sent earlier, and I would agree with everything he said in terms of planning for the future and what is it that we're looking at. And in a very odd way, we have some moments in which we can seize time and actually work on all of that. But having said that, without doing the work on diversity and without bringing in the 3 new members, that has to be integrated in every single thing we do. It cannot stand alone. It is not a separate issue, period. It has to, if you'll pardon the pun, color everything we're doing. So that's all I have to say on it.
I never said it was a separate issue. I said it was part of a bigger issue, and it should be integrated. And so it needs a plan. That's what I said.
Well, actually, you didn't. And yes, I would agree with you. It does need a plan. But it has to start with us working on ourselves as a board.
That's fine, but we still need a plan. That's part of that, too.
Other comments?
Sure. Can you hear me? It's Gabe here.
Yeah, hi, Gabe.
Hey, guys. I think, no problem, Paul. I think there's a few issues here. I think that, first of all, I'm all up for the facilitators. I think we need to do this as soon as possible. I think that could be done in public session. And open government's important, right? I think that there have been concerns that were brought on by the staff of TO Live. And in order to talk about those concerns, we would probably need to go into, in camera or closed session for those, because there would be names, and that's not fair to the staff. So I think potentially we could add another agenda item to discuss this in private session. I also think that there's a third item that's also encompassing all this, which is our policy around free speech versus hate speech. I think it's an issue that got brought up at the last meeting, and I would very much like to have maybe that's a third agenda item, but I would very much like to have a conversation with everybody around that, and so we can have some sort of a policy. I don't want the staff of TO Live to feel that we don't have their back on any of these issues, because I think we do. So I think what I would do is vote on this thing in public session, add another agenda item to talk about what the staff has brought up in private session, and discuss free speech versus hate speech as well.
Thank you, Gabe.
I think we need some guidance from the clerk, Gabe. It's Paula here, as to what we can just add on an agenda. This is a City of Toronto board. Everybody on this board is on a City of Toronto board. You are put onto this board by City Council, and it is, the properties belong to the City of Toronto. It's very clear governance-wise how that works. So I'm not sure we can just add new things on the agenda. And Julie, I'd like you to tell us if that's possible. I'm still going back to one thing that I think, and this has nothing to do with facilitators, but it's just got to do with how this got here. And there was a consensus, but no motion. So I always prefer that the board says, we're going to hire facilitators for this reason, and then you're acting on the board's instructions, Robert. And I know consensus is great, but when you're in difficult waters that we seem to find ourselves in at times, being crystal clear is pretty important. So I'm seeing that the letter says we want to hire facilitators, go to private to do that. that came from a consensus at the board. There's names in there. I think that I don't want to stray from public on matters that are that are public and to go into private. So people's names and everything else, I totally get that. Because if we say no, then that becomes an issue. Why did we say no? I've got that pretty clear on that. Even though we changed all of our nominations to boards, where once you've been selected, you're there, but we haven't selected anybody. So I think that's really fair. I think what we're just a bit more, I understand that completely. It's just the context of facilitation, and it's not in the board minutes, it's nowhere. It's out of the blue. And if that's what the board decides, then the board's deciding to do that and to move into private. I understand what everybody's trying to get to, and I'll just call it unprecedented. But being careful and clear is also something that we have to do and follow good governance. So I would just ask if the clerk will advise if we can add other issues on the agenda at this time, what Gabe would like to do. And I don't think we can, but perhaps we can, Julie. Could you ask, through you, Mr. Chair, could we ask the clerk?
Councillor Fletcher, this is Julie Amoroso. So there are a few issues brought up. First of all, I wanted to let you know that at the previous meeting, the board considered item CT 11.1 and directed the president and CEO of TO Live to report with facilitators and a plan for equity training.
Oh, there you go. That's fine. Okay. You know what? That's different, Robert, than a consensus. So that's good. You're just following up on a board direction. And so my one concern has been laid to rest. Mm-hmm. So is the plan in front of us, and then we're facilitators?
What's in front of the board in this item is the chair's recommendations of the adoption of, or the retention of facilitators attached to the item as a confidential attachment. In terms of the matter of closed session, this is a special meeting, so you cannot add a new item. However, it is up to you to determine what is part of the item and germane to the item. So we could go into we could close the public meeting if it is under one of the, if it is properly being closed, to discuss other issues besides what is exactly in the confidential attachment.
But they would have to be confidential matters.
That is correct, yes.
So can you read the board motion again? Because I'm sorry, I just have to tell everybody, the city server that lays out all of the minutes, it lays out the board agendas, it's down for maintenance. It's down this afternoon. So I can't even get on to look up that other motion. So Julie, it'd be very helpful if you were to read that again, please.
Sure. So that was the President and Chief Executive Officer, TO Live, to report to the board with a list of facilitators and a plan for equity training.
For the board?
Correct.
Or for?
Yes.
Okay,
for the board members.
So we directed Clyde.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. The board had a motion to direct Clyde Wagner to bring a list of facilitators to the board, and just read that one more time. It's to do what? Because I can't get on to read it from last.
Councillor, we will display the item in one moment.
Thank you. That's great. Very much appreciated. There we go. I'm on my silly phone. Okay. I see. Okay, I see it.
Steve, you had your hand up. Would you like to make a comment?
Yes, thank you. I'm cognizant of the fact that we're in public, but I just wanted to observe that this was all triggered by events that we're reacting to that leads us to the desire to have facilitators and equity training for staff and for the board. And I'm just curious why we would undergo that on the board level before we have a full complement of the board. Are the facilitators expected to assist us in recruiting new board members? If so, why can't we just go through the normal city process? And won't the facilitators be more useful once we have a full board that they can facilitate?
I think it's important to remember, as Councillor Fletcher pointed out, we are a creature of the city itself. All of us are appointed by City Council. Bluntly, we have no role in the selection of fellow board members. And in fact, John Fillion and I had a conversation about this recently. And I think I'm reflecting correctly, but John feels strongly that he should not have a role. I will tell you, I've had conversations with John Elvidge, the city clerk, the top bureaucrat, about the process by which board members are selected, and he intends to review that process. And I shared my thoughts on the process with him, and we have further conversations. But the important thing to recognize is we have no role whatsoever in the selection of our fellow board members.
I'm aware of that. The issue I'm trying to address is why bring facilitators in now before we have a full board? Why not bring them in once we do have a full board so that the new members can benefit from the assistance that the facilitators will provide?
Kevin?
To add to that, I think Kathleen made the same point, and I think it's a good one. I don't think that there really is a point in having facilitators and starting a process when we are down 3 members. And we're hoping to bring in members who represent a more diverse community. So I think there's a lot of sense to waiting to start any facilitation or even selection until we have a full board. And I guess the question is, how long will it take us to go through the process of filling out the rest of our board?
Councillor Crawford, nice to see you. Glad you're able to join.
Being late.
Pardon me, guys, but isn't this much bigger than just the facilitators? In my opinion, we're kind of going nowhere, right? I mean, we're just going in circles. We need to redo our policies, in my opinion. We need to rethink how we hire. We need to, transform quite a bit here. How do we get to a point with the right governance here where we can start having those conversations today? Because we just burned up the whole first hour. How do we, this is important, right? How do we make a decision here on whether we want to do this in public or private and start discussing some of these issues? How do we, let's go. How do, maybe city clerks, if you could help us, but we have a lot to talk about, I think.
Well, we've had various views on the motion, which is whether we should move forward with a facilitator now or not. That's what's before us. So I'd ask the board for further comments whether you want to do that or not.
Hi, it's John. I'm going to suggest we defer consideration of hiring specific facilitators. I think we are all of the view that we need facilitators. I think there's a consensus that the most urgent thing is to fill the 3 vacancies, and then I think we need to kind of internally develop a work plan which includes these particular facilitators or others like them, but also some assistance in dealing with some other broader issues in conjunction with that. And I think and whatever else we need to toss into that, which is, I think a lot of discussion is, why do we exist? Who are we? What do we stand for? Which then ties into the specific issue that, that Gabe was talking about. But I think all of this needs to be planned out. It can't just be a free-for-all with no framework for the discussion. I don't think that will be very productive.
Paula?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to go back to the motion that the board passed, which was very clear that facilitators and a plan around equity would be brought. I don't see the plan. So I think that what Councillor Fillion's suggesting is that, and I think someone else suggested, perhaps it was you, Paul, that the 2 kind of need to be delivered together. What are we hiring them to do? It was supposed to come from Clyde. There's nothing here from Clyde. And that needs to have a better look to understand what that should be. Some timing, I think you're absolutely right, whoever said we've got to get these appointments on the move, and that once we have a full board, that will include, I believe, a number of people from diverse communities, that's the entire board having that conversation, not those remaining on the board after people have left. So to my mind, I know everybody's intention is really good and you want to make things right, but given what the motion is, we're not even meeting the requirements of the motion, Mr. Chair, at all. We're meeting one part of it, missing 2. So what the best thing to do might be to shift this over and ask Kevin's HR committee to have a look at this and figure out, is HR? I also heard somebody say it's the board, but also how are we doing within the staff side? That it's kind of a bit more of a global look, and I think that's a good thing. So one of the options is to do that. We just need to find the pathway to get to that. People want to proceed today, but I think after kind of clearer discussion, we realize that we might not be in a position to simply proceed today.
Okay, that's fine. Kevin?
If I can just add, the Clyde has provided for me, and I don't know whether everyone saw it, but a very good timeline of what staff have already been doing for the last 3 years. In respect to hiring practices and how we include diversion and BIPOC hires into what we're doing. Sorry. It's a timeline of the work that they've been doing that brings us right up to now. And I'm suggesting, Clyde, maybe we start by sharing that with the board, because I think it's quite impressive. And it's just unfortunate that we find ourselves in this situation now. But I think it behooves us to look at what we've already done and the progress we've already made. And then if people have suggestions about how to go further, of course, I know the board is open to those.
I think that's a good idea. And Steve has raised a number of issues in his email. And I've had a conversation with Clyde about the issues. And I know Clyde is more than willing to address those issues on where he is in fulfilling what he perceives, and I think everybody on this board perceives as involvement. So, no question that our management team is ready to address those issues, I think, in a pretty forceful way, which would be positive. and we confer selection of facilitators. I would ask the board a question as to whether management should select board facilitators or we should select facilitators. I feel we should be doing our own. It's pretty tough when you get a resume to decide one facilitator from the other, which is why I went to the city and said, "Would you recommend?" And so I think to satisfy Councillor Fletcher, instead of conversations and emails back and forth, and in fact, I have an email in which they say these are the two we recommend, and I'm happy to send it to the council. That we go back to those two candidates and inform them that we are deferring final decision right now while we achieve some other objectives. I must say, Paul's comments that there really is no need to rush because we don't have any theaters that are doing it. They're empty. I think that's probably a reasonable given. So we don't have to rush at this thing, but I think everybody agrees we want to move forward and continue to face. So if that is a summary that's acceptable to the board, gives us direction. Steve, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Robert. I didn't hear quite everything you said because your audio was cutting in and out on my computer anyways, but I just wanted to clarify that the email that I sent was sent only to the board members because I wanted those issues to be discussed by the board as opposed to management, not because I have any lack of faith in Clyde or the team, but I don't think it's fair to them to make them responsible for our vision. And I really think we need to revisit our vision in the context of the way the world looks, in the context of our personal history as a board in the last month or two, because we need a whole new repositioning. And I don't think it's up to us to keep punting those responsibilities back to management. It gets us back on the same merry-go-round that we've been on, I think, for the last while.
Other comments? Yeah, Kathleen, and then Jillian, and then Paul.
A couple of questions. The process for recruiting the 3 new members, that has started, I believe. Has the ad been gone out? Because I got a call from someone saying they saw an ad.
Oh.
Yeah. So does the clerk know where that process is? I'm not hearing anything. My suggestion would be, and I don't quite understand why we can't have parallel streams here, that we go through the recruitment process, obviously in the way that the city council conducts its recruitment processes, but we make sure that happens as quickly as possible. And while that is going on, I really don't see any reason why the board can't recommend or support the facilitators, and then conversations with them can start, but that the actual facilitation happens once the new members are on board. But my nervousness is, if we constantly are putting things to one side because of timing and protocol, we're going to lose a lot of time. And I don't think we can afford to lose a lot of time right now with this particular situation. I really don't. And so my recommendation would be to handle both of them in a parallel way, and certainly move forward with the facilitation and the plan discussion and all of those things that need to be thought about and put together once the new members come on board. But I really don't understand why the prep stuff can't start now. And part of it would start with the board recommending back to the chair and clerks that they either support or they don't support the facilitators that we have in front of us. Otherwise, I feel that why are we even having this meeting today?
I'm going to jump in because I don't mind choosing facilitators, but I think that part of the reason that we have to replace board members is because people feel like they're trying to run to catch up on a moving train and important things are happening that they're not included in. And having a facilitation process begin before they're on board makes them feel like they're not really being a part of the facilitation. They have to catch up. I think that's exactly the problem. It's not the solution.
Jillian?
I have a slightly different way of looking at it, which is if I were one of these fine people who are being recruited through the appointments process, I would like to see that work is already underway to address some of these issues. And therefore, a selection of a facilitator, and not to get so meaningfully into the process that new board members aren't integrated into that process, but to see that meaningful work is already being undertaken, that's being taken seriously, we're acting upon it, work is somewhat underway, but plenty of room for new voices to come in so that a new, re-energized, re-architected group that is representative of who we want to be is then starting to tackle those bigger issues of who we want to be as an organization. Thank you.
What do you think those new people on the board would like to have had a say as to the choice of facilitators, since it's the people that they're supposed to be representing that those facilitators are supposed to address?
May I just add that I'm chairing recruitment of a CEO for another organization right now. And we have had a couple of top-notch candidates decline because the organizations left too white. And I'm listening to Jillian. You know, if we want to recruit top talent, they will only go where they're going to feel comfortable. They're only going to feel comfortable if they see diversity in the organization. That's the lesson that's been handed to this other organization. So we're now, anyway. And the federal government, this new provincial ruling, Blue Ribbon Committee that just came out today, has said that boards, they're recommending, and it's not, we'll see what happens, but they're saying 40% should be female or women, and 20% should be BIPOC. So, you know, I'm just saying this is a tough area to make judgment calls. It really is. I think next was Councillor Fletcher, then Councillor Filion.
I thought there was somebody in there between.
Did I miss somebody?
I thought you did miss somebody.
I might have. Didn't write it down. I should. Anyway, go ahead, Councillor.
I'm not sure when, maybe you discussed it already, the letters that we got, the resignation letters, they've been discussed by the board somewhere? No? Yeah, because I'm not always as plugged in, because I'm recruiting the recruitment for the CEO of Toronto Community Housing, and if you want to talk about difficult recruitments, that's a difficult one because the number of CEOs that we've had, but I know we will get a very good one. And we're looking at all these same issues. So I'm really sympathetic to saying, I think if we do discuss things that people are saying they feel left out, not respected, not part of the picture, and here we are going to set a whole process in place, and then, as someone said, have people catch up to us. So it is really hard to do these things on WebEx. Let's all agree on that. It's not meant to undertake difficult issues. But I want to stay really clear. There was to be a plan, and I don't know if those consultants were supposed to help us develop the plan. It looked like Clyde was sending that. So I'm just not sure there's been enough thinking go into that. And I know, Robert, you've talked to OMA and staff about what that looks like for facilitators, but I'm not sure that you talked about the plan.
No.
Didn't talk about the plan. So what would be expected of a city board around a plan And I'm not sure they're aware of the issues that have been identified to the remaining members of the board from those folks that have left. Were they well aware of that? Sorry.
Are they what?
Well
Yes.
aware of.
Yes. Oh yeah, I've kept them fully.
Somebody's. Okay. So it does seem that we're at that moment as a board where we have to really figure things out. And I'm not sure what the facilitators are doing. I don't want them to get ahead of everybody. I don't want to lose this issue. I don't want to have a conversation about issues that were raised to our board. And I don't know where that's supposed to happen either. And they were raised about our board, and they were raised about our staff. So
I don't want to rush.
Sorry, I just want to be clear. The role of the board is to ensure that the organization is living up to its goals and requirements, and to be reviewing those things. And we haven't had. I'm glad that Kevin, you've got something. But we have to also review all of those things clearly.
I'm personally feeling a little embarrassed because we've got the facilitators on standby to speak to us if we wish them to. Is the board ready to make a decision as to whether you would like to hear from them or you prefer to defer? Sounds to me like you prefer to defer, but
I'd just like to speak to it, Robert, if I could again, if that's possible. So, there is no perfect way forward, but I'm trying to incorporate all of the wise things people have said. I don't think anybody has really said anything that anyone else disagrees with fundamentally. So we need to, just to sort of summarize how that might all come together, maybe. So we proceed as quickly as possible with the selection of the 3 people. Realistically, that's not going to happen before the council meeting at the end of September, just if you look at the council schedule. In the meantime, I agree with what you said, Robert, about you need to, if we want good candidates, we need to demonstrate that we're willing to be the kind of board that they want to be on. So I think incorporating that, we should hire the facilitators, probably do a session with the facilitators on that we could do before those people join us. And also, I think, talk about internally kind of a plan for incorporating some other types of facilitation, such as you alluded to, or brainstorming sessions. And then we will have but that we do that second part with the new people. So we kind of come up with a timeline, get the 3 new people on board before they arrive, hire these facilitators, make some good use of them, which I think is very possible, and then do a much broader thing, including these facilitators with the new people on board, but have that all scheduled out so we can, I think, do everything that everybody wants.
Gary?
First of all, I apologize for coming in late, so I haven't heard the entire context of the conversation. But I want to agree with you, John. I think when we're looking at we need to get the process started in hiring the three new board members very, very quickly. It's take a bit of time. It's a very long process. Of course, with the COVID circumstances doesn't help. But I think just also agreeing, John, what Robert said is when we're looking at, and these people who are looking at this board, whether or not they want to be on this, if we don't begin a process with the facilitators, whether we're hiring them or not, that will have an impact on whether or not they even want to put their name forward. So if they know that we are very sincere and serious about moving forward as a board and as an organization, we have to come out of the gate fairly quickly, and recognizing that we have to do that. Hiring or having some facilitators with us to begin a process, and it's not a short process. It'll include work before we bring on new board members, work after the new board members are coming on. So I tend to agree with John that I think we need to get some, because we don't give an indication that if we sort of suggest that we're not hiring any facilitators for whatever reason right now, that sends a message, and I don't know if that's the message that's important for what we want to do as a board. We do need to move forward as quickly as possible.
Steve, then Gabe.
I don't want to belabor it because I've made my point already, but the issue of whether we'll get good candidates with a facilitator on board or not works both ways. It's maybe our opinion as a white board that these facilitators are good. We have one choice for each category. That's not much choice. It's just as likely to turn off good candidates if they don't agree with our choice as it is to attract them. The more important issue for me is not whether they'll be attracted or not, but we're...
Steve, stop, please. Stop. Kike, hi, nice to see you. We're not ready to speak with you right now. Board is having a lengthy discussion about a timing issue. And so, if I may, I'd ask you to sign off for now, and I'll have the clerk's office get right back to you as soon as conclude this conversation. You're on mute, by the way.
On mute?
Thank you. Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. Would it be for another day, Robert?
I'm not
sure. For me, that would be ideal for me. I was trying to squeeze this in to a day that it doesn't. I'm not even at home. I'm not in my office for any of that. So it just.
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. Out of respect for your time, yes, we'll come back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll talk. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye bye.
Sorry, Steve.
That's okay. As one of my daughters would say, oopsie. The point that I'm trying to make is, it's not so important to me who we attract or who we don't attract by having a facilitator on board.
Oh my God.
Because I think that cuts both ways. What's more important to me is having their voice around the table before we make that selection. That's why we want them on the board in the first place. If we don't, we run the risk of them saying, I know this facilitator. I'm kind of lukewarm, or I'm negative, or I'm positive, but this is a process that I haven't been heard on, so I'm not totally bought in.
Dave?
I think I'm with Councillor Crawford and filling on this one. I really think we need to do this as soon as possible. I think when you're a new board member, you're always going to have catching up to do, right? I mean, we're not going to stop the St. Lawrence project because we don't want the next person to feel like they're out of the loop. Like, we have to move forward. And I think, I think we have to think about the staff here that we're governing. I think we have an obligation to them to do the right thing. And I don't know if everybody on the staff feels that we are doing the right thing on this issue. And at the end of the day, we're the boss of this organization. We have an ethical, we don't want, let's not let them down, right? We can get caught up in timing, but I want the staff of TO Live to feel that we have this started, that we care, that we acknowledge shortcomings, and that we, we'll fix it. I'd also love to hear from Clyde. He hasn't spoken at all, and I'm really curious what his thoughts are on this whole thing.
Clyde?
To the chair, whenever the board is ready, I can address some of the issues.
Sure, please do.
Thank you to the board, and thank you for some time this afternoon. Thank you for taking time this afternoon to meet. I do believe that this is a very important issue for all of us and for the board. It is obviously a global issue that's occurring, but for us it's very specific and it's very important. I do want to remind the board of some work that's happened in the past, then we can talk about the issues that have occurred recently and then where we're going in the future, at least from the staff perspective. I should start by saying that the staff is, I also want to remind the board that we're in the middle of a pandemic, that 600 people are laid off at the moment and are out of work and are listening to this discussion, I'm sure. And also that we have to serve them, and we're looking to bring them back to work as soon as possible. So we really desperately need the board's help. We need the board's help through all of these issues, and we look forward to welcoming that as soon as possible. When we began the journey down the road towards TO Live, which started in 2017, we did the amalgamation of the company. At the end of that year and the beginning of 2018, the board will remember that we had a vision for the company which reflected the diversity and strength of the City of Toronto. We are the only, I believe, large arts and cultural organization that can truly fulfill this mandate. And we believed in it so much that we installed it into our mission and vision. In 2018, the staff took on the role of redoing all of the policies for the organization with the board's assistance and with outside help, and the City of Toronto's Diversity and Equity Division, and we instilled our mission and vision in our policies. You'll see that outline in an email that I sent to the entire board on June 27th. Please look back in your emails. All of you received it. And in that email, there's Employment Policies Initiative timeline. It is the one that Kevin Garland referred to, so I would ask that you please read it in detail. After 2017, we embarked on in the beginning of 2019, we embarked on a total staff education. That education is following on a system and a plan, if you will, Councillor Fletcher, although one that I'm very happy to put into more detail for the board, and I apologize I wasn't ready for today. That plan follows a very well thought out plan, not by us, but by many different organizations, that goes like this. First, change your policies, then educate, then enact, and enforce. We are not through the education portion of this policy. In fact, we were supposed to, with Kika, who is just actually on the screen, who is the person, and I recommended her to you on June 27th in my email, who has been leading us for that area of consultation for the staff, and I highly recommend Kika to you, to the board. I also want to draw, as it was drawn to me, a sense of Lewin's change theory, which goes like this. It's unfreeze, change, and then freeze. And we are essentially in the shift and change period of the organization. In the middle of this period, or I would say at the beginning of this period of education, of change, we were hit by COVID-19. And then on top of that, and after a very tragic event, the world has woken up to the need for change, particularly with the help of the Black Lives Matter movement, which we support. So here we are today. We have, as I described it to a friend the other day, we have been tilling the soil starting in 2017, but it has become very clear to us that there are deep roots that we have not gotten to in the organization that need to be dug out forcibly in order to really fulfill and lead and live up to the mission and vision that we set at the beginning of 2018. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to the board. That is our process. That was our plan before. This is a renewed plan now, ever more important to us because we recognize the failures that we have done in the past. And we recognize the need for a diligent effort to correct these. I've stated the things in a statement to you in that same email on a list of commitments from the staff, which include hiring changes, which include the setup of an equity and diversity committee, which we've already begun, and items underneath those particular items, which are very specific. But we cannot go as far if we do not have the board's help. The last thing I will say to you is if you care for my opinion, I would weigh in with Gillian Smith. I do believe that having someone else and showing a start, showing help, and that you're open to it from outside facilitation now is the right direction. I understand completely, Steve, what you're saying, and I agree with you that yes, it's a catch. But I think an indication that the board is willing to change and willing to help will go a long way with the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Clyde. Appreciate your comment. Questions of Clyde from the board? There's no further discussion. I call for the vote.
For this, was there a motion to defer that was made?
No, I don't believe so. Julie, would you post the motion?
We don't currently have one, Mr. Chair.
Well, there was one that was sent out. There was the one that went out. That the board of directors, well, I can read it, that the board of directors of TO Live, recess its public session to meet in closed session.
Robert, that's a motion to go into closed session.
Right.
The board can resolve to go into closed session if you wish. I will point out if someone is moving a motion to defer and that motion carries, then that will effectively end the meeting in consideration of the item.
Can I ask Robert?
Right. Sorry, could I just so that I understand where we are, and maybe the board does already, that if that motion passes, we go into closed session to discuss negotiations with regard to facilitators. Is that correct, Julie?
Yes, that's correct. If you move a motion to go into closed session and that passes, then we will go into closed session.
Right.
Sorry, we just somehow, a facilitator who is in a private document has somehow turned up into the meeting. And I don't understand how that happened. It's no longer private.
Julie, can you help us with that?
Sure. The meeting is public. We're in public session at the moment, so.
We're in public session, Kathleen.
Yes.
That happened in public session, right? You saw it. Yes.
That's what I just said, which is how she got into the meeting, because we're in public session.
But I don't know how somebody would know to come into the meeting unless they were invited in or unless they had a previous, do you know what I mean?
I do, and I believe the chair explained that he had them on standby in case we wanted to ask questions in the private session. So that's how that happened.
I suggest, Robert, that my read of the people who are here, I don't know if everybody's spoken or not, is that people would like to, are certainly open to engaging facilitators now. So if we have any questions about who those people would be, what they would be doing, when they would be doing it, and how much we would be paying them for that, some of which I think is legitimately private. If we want any of those discussions, let's move into private, have whatever we need to discuss there, and then come out and adopt whatever motions are arising from that.
I'm just going to say one more time, and I have putting a bike lane on the Danforth, and I have to go, but it's highly irregular. There should be a scope. Here's what we're going to hire people to do, and here is your suggestions as to who we're hiring. And here's our budget, here's everything. That's public. We have a scope of work. We're going to hire people, and then they're going to tell us their scope of work. We have no scope of work here. There's nothing. There's a document with some names. There's a letter from the chair. There's a motion from last time. And I know people want to move quickly, but this is just irregular.
I agree with Paula. We need a scope document I've never hired a consultant for any purpose without a scope document because they make their own scope.
Right.
And it just becomes a blank check.
So I think
and it doesn't achieve the objectives.
We should defer this. We should have a scope of work. We should have recommended consultants, know how they were recommended, what they're doing, what their areas of expertise are, what their specialties are, why it's them, and if we want the person to come from the city manager to say, here's who we're recommending because you need them, then I'd like that person to be there. I'm just finding this. The cart is so far before the horse, and if we want to hire somebody to help us with the scope of work, I don't think you hire 4 people. It's okay to hire somebody to help us with the scope, to come up with that plan. The board can do that. Or we can ask the city manager's office to help us with the scope, so we can then hire someone. We're rushing so hard because we got slapped so hard, and you're going to make a lot more mistakes. And we've made too many.
Well, let me just say that when you reviewed their material that was sent to you, their bios, CVs, and the one candidate that's online, some of your questions were definitely answered.
But Robert, I want to go back. Yes, I agree. That absolutely. But what I really want to do is say, like just Paul has said, what are we hiring them to do? What is their scope? Do you need 4 people to come up with the scope? Do you need 1 person to come up with the scope? Do we have to work with the city manager's office to come up with the scope? What is it we're trying to do? And just interview everybody and say, here's what's going on. I just see that we want to take this seriously, and I think we need to be businesslike and professional. And we've already been accused of not being very professional, so I don't want to do that again.
Robert, can we sort of table all this and have another meeting sometime soon rather than vote on something where we're going to have likely have a split board? I think we're all wanting to head in the same direction. We just need a bit clearer path forward, and it shouldn't take long to put something in front of us that would do that.
A scope?
Yes, and I'd be happy to request that the people that have been providing advice from city staff come and speak to the board, because I think you'd find that useful. I think you're going to discover that the people like to propose very specific program, the way they do it, and they'll walk you through it. You have to find acceptable or unacceptable as you wish.
Is there an appropriate subcommittee of the board that can kind of pull the various issues together and then bring something back here as soon as possible that would be sufficiently massaged so that we would have unanimity or close to unanimity on it?
Well, I think this is human resources issue, so it goes to the HR committee.
Well, sure. I don't think it matters what committee it goes to, because anybody who's on the board can attend whatever committee meeting. I think what's important is that it goes somewhere where people can participate in a discussion, so that when we come back together again, we can move forward easily.
And I think that's agree. With the scope of work, we could move to just defer that to the HR committee to include a conversation with the city manager's office, and as well potential scope of work for the facilitators. And I'm not opposed to hiring them. I just want us to do it really and truly the right way.
Sure, but I mean not just these consultants, Paula. I mean other scope of work we may want to engage in.
We need to think of, that's correct, John. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd suggest we look at governance as a topic as well, because that's something we're all concerned with. Dave? Yes, Dave.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher, for the bike lane on Danforth. Awesome. before we do this, could I just ask the chair of the HR committee and potentially Clyde about the scope of work? Perhaps there is one that wasn't brought to us, but was brought to them. I do agree that there's other issues. I'd like to add the kind of the free speech / hate speech policy to that scope of work as well, if we don't have that already. But I'd like to hear from the people that have been working on this whole time before we kind of end it.
Well, just to start, my understanding was that the board was looking for some training around how we can improve our ability to hire and to conduct ourselves in our own meetings in a way that is much more inclusive and welcoming, and in which nobody feels that they're being disrespected or ignored, or that their viewpoint isn't being taken seriously. And it's that training that I understand to be the scope of work that we were asking for the consultant to undertake. And the two consultants, one of whom is Black and the other is Indigenous, I think clearly those are the two perspectives that we are now lacking on the board of many. So I'm not sure, it's very tough to pull together the scope of work for that piece. But as I understand it, there's also a lot of discomfort with the governance and the way the board is operating. And I suspect part of that is because of COVID and because we haven't been able to meet as a group and see each other and be in the same room. And I think as a result, there's been a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of stuff that's flying around in emails, which is the worst possible way to communicate. So if the board wants to have a discussion about why we are where we are, and the content of the number of the emails, in particular the 2 letters of resignation, I'm not sure that's an HR issue. I think that's an issue for the entire board. And again, it seems to me it would be impossible to have that discussion without doing it in camera, but maybe we can't do that. So I'm happy to help with the scope of work for the consultants, but there's a much bigger elephant in this room, and I think that's the one we probably need to come to grips with as well.
Steve? You're on mute, oh boy. Steve, you're on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep.
I'm on the HR committee, and if this issue of defining scope for facilitators comes to the HR committee, I will not participate, and if necessary, I'll resign from the committee. You can appoint somebody else who believes in it. I don't believe in it because I don't think it's for us as a bunch of white people, even though it's questionable in my own mind whether I put myself in that category as a victim of racial violence myself. It is not inclusive to have a bunch of white people give a mandate to facilitators, no matter how good they are, to describe how we should deal with a board, and then go and hire people from those communities and say, we decided this for you. That is putting the cart before the horse. I want the people from those communities to have a voice as to what the issues are, who gets hired, how they deal with everything, and I want to hear from them what they would like represented at this table.
So you're going back to getting people on board and making sure that the scope of work, that they're part of determining the scope of work for the training of the whole board itself.
So that pushes us well into the fall. Okay.
What's the rush?
I'm not saying there's a rush. I'm just saying
that is a very clear direction, and it's a very depends on what your motion would look like, but that there would be no I would prefer to actually consult, but since we're a city board, Steve, we're not a corporate board, we're not bringing on our own people and our friends and everybody else, we're city board, that we are now at a place that's becoming difficult for us. And I would prefer to ask to have a conversation with the city manager's office that oversees boards and let them know we're in this prickly place that says, do we start now without the new board members and define the scope of work, or do we get the new board members in with the understanding they be part of determining the scope of work and be part of the training? And that's the ballot question that's in front of us. And I'd like some advice from, we only represent the city. We're only there in the stead of city council. So I think it's time to get a little advice. And if they say, we think it's better that you bring these, given what's gone on, we think it's better you bring these folks on and then have your whole scope determined, and that's a good process. We think that's a wise decision, then I would go with that. If they would to say, we think that it's, given the circumstances, that you need to review what people have said to you, and at the same time we're recruiting, and then it would be a fresh start with the board, then I think we should accept that. But there are people that think about this all the time in the city department. We have an anti-Black racism secretary, we have an Indigenous secretary, we've got a lot going on. So I'd like to be guided there as to what the best thing to do, not by our desire to simply, and I think you've raised a really important point. And when you say it like that, I think, yeah, we're just now going on a road that maybe we need to think about that. So I would prefer to send off the chair and anybody else who wants to be on a discussion with the appropriate staff to say, here's our conundrum, give us advice. So when we move in a direction, we've moved in that direction with advice from our shareholder.
Gary, just before you speak, I have spoken with numerous people in City Hall. I'm happy to go back and pose the question as to sequentially how we tackle this. And I hope it's agreed with everybody. I'm not going to rely on one voice because...
Breaking up, Rob.
Oh, sorry. Let me turn off my video for a minute, if that helps. I've spoken to so many people in City Hall over the last number of days that I would want to go back to them, and I'll report back to you if there are various views from whom what view come. And I don't expect we're going to get unanimity from City Hall, just as we're not getting it here. So obviously I'm going to go Omo, and I'm going to go to others.
Robert, we will ask somebody, just as the city, because the city manager's office sponsors everything that every board does, to say, give you advice in writing, give you advice however they want. It's not for a whole bunch of people to have a whole bunch of different opinions. We're looking for advice.
I get it. So,
period.
Nope. Okay. But then you're saying there's one person I ask for advice?
I'm saying it's the city manager. Whoever oversees all these, and Mr. Elvidge from clerks, and whoever oversees body.
Fine, I'll go to him. Fine.
Then that's it. And I'm happy to go along with you. I'm sure so is anybody else. I'm happy to do this as well, because I want to get this sorted out. I hear Steve. I don't want him resigning from everything because he doesn't like this. I think we should all understand that our shareholder is thinking about all of these things constantly, including in the police, including in all the boards and agencies and commissions, and they should give us professional advice. And then that would be good to follow. And we're kind of at a fork in the road. I don't want to vote against it, but I really feel strongly that we have to, reputationally, there's a risk.
Okay. Could I then, since we've got two board members that feel strongly about this, would this board be prepared to meet within a week?
Yes.
Is that acceptable?
Yes.
Let's do that. All right. Given that, may I then ask for a motion to conclude this board meeting? We'll come back to a new date.
Robert? Mr. Chair, this is Julie. Is to be clear, are you requesting the consideration of the item be deferred to a meeting to be held,
Yes.
a special meeting to be held following consultation with the city manager or other city staff?
Yes. Well said. Thank you, Julie.
Guys, sorry, if I can come in a week, we're not going to have these 3 new board members in place. I feel like we're going to get on the same call. It's going to be the same conversation again. We'll have more input, of course, and I think it's valuable. But if the core issue, and Steve, I completely see your point of view here. You know, we're going to come back with, you know, more perspective, but the same challenge in a week. So I don't want to derail us even more. But what are we going to do in a week's time that would be different from today? Or, you know, we're not going to have these board members approved in a week.
Okay, not sure you heard exactly that Steve is suggesting that it would not be fair to the new board members to proceed without them. We'll put ourselves in the same position. Others think we have to start now. I believe it's important, and I'm talking about reputational risk for this board, for this company, for this city. In making a decision, I want to know that we have the backing of the city saying that we think this is the best road. We think that we support that waiting. We go, okay, we're going to wait. Or we support moving ahead now in this way. That's a good plan. I don't think that we should be, I think it's so clear. When you talk about a ballot question, we have to, that's what we're trying to figure out here. What's the right?
Got it. Okay. Julie, back to you.
So Robert, Robert, a question. If the city comes back saying proceed now, and we're back to discussing potential candidates, will we also then have the scope of work to assess at the same time?
Kevin?
I just add options for potential scope of work on the discussion with the city.
And Kevin, you muted yourself in order to talk.
Kevin, you're
If we get a clear decision from the city manager's office or whoever it is about which of these 2 roads we need to follow, I think in either case, we can draft a scope of work. It may need to change if we take the option that Steve suggests that we wait, because we would need input from them about the scope of work. If the recommendation is that we go ahead now, then I think this board can review a scope of work and we can decide to go ahead in a week. I don't think the scope of work is a very complicated thing to put together.
I think we all should recognize these facilitators have a very clear approach as to how they approach an assignment. And I welcome Kevin having conversations with them. They certainly didn't indicate any flexibility when I spoke.
Well, if there's no flexibility, then that becomes part of the decision. It would seem to me, if we want to go in a certain direction and that's not where they're going to take us, then we probably need more choices.
That's why we're going to be online.
Right.
Heard how
Engaged them already, Robert. Can I just be clear? Had you engaged these folks, or?
I have done nothing. Paula, please.
No, I'm just asking.
No, stop. Please. I made it so clear. There was no decision. I brought this to the board for discussion. I absolutely made no decision. Please. I wouldn't dare do that.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I did not mean to ruffle your feathers, but normally, anyway, we'd be interviewing them. That was your suggestion. That would have been an interview then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I understand. Thank you. Okay.
Julie, do you have a motion you can read to us, please?
I do. We will display it on the screen, and then you can read it and take the vote. So it's on the screen now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That consideration of the item be deferred to a special meeting board to follow the city manager, including topics, options for a scope work for the board facility.
I might add the words timing of engagement after options somewhere.
Yeah. Okay.
That works for everybody.
John, you're on mute.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to also, and I don't have the wording up anymore, but to also, this says a board facilitator, which assumes for this particular issue only, and I think we need to look at whether we need broader facilitation, including this specific facilitation.
Yeah, as I said, I think the board should consider governance facilitation. So
if we could say timing of engagement for,
say board facilitators, make it plural.
Yeah.
Can we just deal with the one thing? Now we're going into the whole works. Let's just get the one thing done and then go back to the other.
Well, Paula, some of us think it's all connected.
Okay. I just think we're now.
If I could just jump in, you have in there options for a scope of work. So John, that's where you could drop in the discussion about broader or narrower or whatever. I think you've already got it there.
I think scope of work covers it just the way it is. I don't think you need to be specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. All right. Discussion. I can't see everybody for a fall. Thank you very much. All those in favor? And contrary, unanimously. Thank you. Julie, I think that concludes the meeting.
You are correct. That concludes the meeting.
Right.
Great.
Thank you, everybody. We will be back quickly.
Bye, Glenn.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye, guys.
Everybody have a good weekend and a drink.
Yeah.
Which order?
Thank you, everybody.